The first time someone hit my wife in our front yard, I thought the whole neighborhood had finally lost its mind. It happened fast. Yellow violation notice on the fence. Two men in khaki vests showing up like they were deputized by a weather report. And then one of them reached across my mailbox and slapped her so hard her coffee jumped in the cup. You don't forget the sound of a palm on a cheek, and you don't forget the look on her face, the way she blinked like she was checking if it had actually happened. That's when I stopped pretending this was just petty bylaws and started treating it like a war. My name is Mara Lane, and we moved to Hawthorne Ridge for the maple trees and the quiet, not for drama. My husband, Ethan, is steady the way a man becomes after too many years in the service gone. Practical, a little stubborn. He can fix a fence or explain tax codes and still tell a terrible joke at dinner. We're the kind of people who bake pumpkin bread and leave a lawn chair out at sunset. So when the HOA president, Miriam Cross, started sending us notes about curb appeal discrepancies, we laughed it off. She had a smile that could slice bread and a clipboard that intimidated like a law degree, and the neighborhood treated her like the mayor of small things. But small things have a way of getting big when someone decides power is fun. It didn't feel small the day Miriam's compliance officers arrived. They called themselves volunteers, but their vests had no logos and their faces had that tired look people get when they're doing something they know is wrong. One of them told my wife Lenato step off the property because her garden gnome was allegedly too close to the public easement. Lena, bless her, started to argue the logic of statute when the man reached out and slapped her. I remember the moment before my hands moved, that elastic second when the brain is still figuring out if it's allowed to explode. Ethan moved first to grab the man and shoved him back in. The neighborhood suddenly became a live wire. Phones came out. Someone said, "Call the cops." Someone else shouted, "Record it." We did call the cops. We recorded it all. The footage was terrible and perfect shaky, human, honest. Miriam showed up in heels and sunglasses like the director of a bad play and announced, loud enough for everyone in our cul-de-sac to hear, that this was about order and community standards. Her voice had that frosty politeness that breeds resentment. When Ethan held up the phone and asked her if she'd ordered the men to enforce rules with violence, she smiled and said, "I never asked anyone to touch anyone." It was a moment of theater meant to close the scene. It didn't. Next came the small reveals that turned into a map of intent. Agnes, our next-door neighbor with the tiny dachshund and a habit of knitting in public, knocked on our door 2 nights later with a manila envelope trembling in her hands. Inside were photographed snapshots of conversations, receipts for cash payments, lists of pressure points, names, addresses, personal notes. Miriam didn't just want uniform lawns. She was building leverage. She had spent years compiling people's secrets like baseball cards' late payments, old arguments, a son's arrest, a widow's legal dispute, and she used those cards to stack the deck. It was systematic, and once you saw the pages it felt like discovering a blueprint for bullying. That's where the real fight began, not in court right away, though we did prepare for that, but in ordinary, stubborn resistance. We started a group chat, the Hawthorne Watch, with neighbors who were fed up, teachers, a retired mail carrier, a barber, and a woman who ran the corner bakery. We shared documents, pooled money for legal counsel, and set up a schedule for who would record the next time someone in a vest came to inspect. It wasn't glamorous. It was coffee and courage, spreadsheets and late-night texts. But it was a start. Miriam escalated. She filed a flurry of petty suits, fines for hedges, charges for color choices, injunctions that smelled like paper and paperwork. She also started whispering threats through proxies, text messages from numbers that vanished, notes slipped under doors, a voicemail that played a low, old-fashioned hum before someone said, "Be careful what you expose." Then came a day that made the hair on the back of our necks stand up. A pickup truck rolled through the neighborhood at dusk with a bumper sticker that read, "Keep it orderly." And in the bed of the truck were men who looked like they stayed in dim hotels and spent their days bullying small towns. One of them, when stopped by Ethan and a few neighbors, got out and tapped the butt of a handgun with his palm, small, quick, and unmistakable message. He didn't point it. He didn't need to. The idea was planted. The threat had a weight to it. We took it to the police and, importantly, to a lawyer. We were careful. Ethan never wanted us to be reckless, and I kept thinking about Lena's face, steady now but forever changed. We met with an attorney who told us to collect everything, to document names, dates, patterns. That's when the neighborhood started to feel less like a place where rules were arbitrary and more like a place being weaponized. Miriam had woven in network shell accounts, off-the-books payments, people she could pressure into silent compliance. The more we dug, the more the web spread. The turning point was an HOA meeting that Miriam called to discuss community cohesion. She expected applause. She didn't expect cameras and the smell of legal subpoenas in the air. We organized. We brought up the phone footage and the envelope and the receipts. We turned the meeting into a platform for revelation. When Lena walked to the front and held up the recording of the slap, you could feel the room tilt. Miriam tried to laugh it off. A misunderstanding, she said. A miscommunication, but a miscommunication doesn't involve hired thugs and threatening trucks. Faces shifted. People who had been silent for years suddenly had words. I remember Miriam's reaction in a way I won't forget. She leaned forward, as if to whisper a secret to the room, and said, "If you think I'm finished, you don't know what I'm capable of." It was thinly veiled and meant to frighten. She wanted us to look small. But suddenly we were not a handful of disgruntled homeowners. We were a community that had been poked and decided to poke back. The vote of no confidence, under the hum of fluorescent lights, passed by a margin that felt like a reprieve, but the reprieve came with a price. Miriam didn't vanish. She dug in. The real drama came later, on a rainy Thursday when Miriam tried a different play, a planned demonstration at the town's community center, ostensibly to protest a lack of discipline in public spaces. We knew better. We suspected she wanted to test the waters, to see whether her muscle would keep people in line. So we organized again, neighbors, volunteers, a few members of the press who smelled a story, and we coordinated with law enforcement. It was tense, cinematic, the kind of night you see in movies where people stand on porches and someone aligns their phone to record a moment that might go sideways. Miriam arrived with a small crowd, faces set and determined, but instead of chaos, the police had already been given the evidence we'd collected. When her hired men tried to push past the barricade, it was over quickly: arrests, shouts, the whine of a siren cutting off someone's plan. Miriam's empire of small cruelties was unraveling. Court was messy but revelatory. Document after document came to light. The shell accounts, the payments to anonymous contractors, the lists of people to pressure into silence. Miriam tried to defend herself with indignation and a lawyer's cadence. "I only wanted order," she said. "I was protecting property values." That line never landed. You don't protect property values by smearing people and hiring intimidation squads. The jury heard the recordings, the manila envelope, the truck testimony. They heard neighbors who had been afraid to speak for years finally speak. Miriam was convicted of conspiracy, witness intimidation, and a string of lesser counts that together spelled out abuse of power. We all breathed out. For a while, Hawthorne Ridge felt like itself against splash of holiday lights, kids on bikes, Ethan fixing the porch swing. But the end of one bully's reign didn't mean the end of the idea that someone could weaponize small-town structures. We found a note on our door a month after the verdict. "Watch what you start." It was anonymous. It was cowardly. It was also, in a strange way, the thing that made us stronger. You can't be afraid of shadows when you choose light. I tell you this not because I think we're special or brave. We were scared. We were messy. We were human. We made mistakes. But we also learned that recording, sharing, organizing small acts of resistance add up. If you've ever lived in a place where someone's little authority grows teeth, don't assume it's just the way of the world. Ask questions. Gather friends. Hold your footage. And if you have the chance to stand up at a meeting and say, plainly, "This is not okay," do it, even if your voice shakes. So tell me, what would you have done? Was it right to expose this and risk escalation, or should we have tried more quiet negotiations? Drop your thoughts below and tell me where you fall, law and order or community defense. Share if you think small authority can go too far, and if you've ever seen someone in your town turn rules into control. If you like this, tap share, lace, make sure other neighborhoods know they aren't alone.